Dr. Farangis Ghaderi is postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Kurdish Studies, University of Exeter. She holds a PhD in Kurdish Studies, University of Exeter here in UK, and an MA in English literature in Tehran, Iran. She has taught Kurdish, Sorani, and Persian at the University of Exeter, and is the author of several peer-reviewed articles on Kurdish literature and co-editor of Kurdish language academic journal called Darwaze. Farangis, the floor is yours, and you have 15 minutes today. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share, hopefully you will see my PowerPoint. Yeah?
Yes, it's here, yes.
Okay. Sorry, just 1 minute. Hello everyone. Thank you, Kurd-Akad, for organizing this session and for inviting me. And my greetings to all friends and colleagues and everyone who has joined us tonight, well, at this difficult time and also late in the day, definitely in the UK and I guess in most part of the world. So I was asked very kindly to take part, and I was asked to keep it introductory and short. So I hope I will do that. I'm not a linguist.
Farangis, sorry, can I cut you? Could you please make your screen full? Oh yeah, it's better now. Thank you.
Yeah, apologies. So my expertise is literature, so I would start with reciting you I think one of my most favorite verses in Kurdish, and I'll explain why. And it is in Horami. So the poet is Khaneh Qubadi, who was an 18th century poet. I recite the poem. پیچش ندوران ای دنیای بدکش محسوزن هر کس و زبان ویش راستن مواجهان فارسی شکرن کردی جلای من بل شیرین ترن. For some reason in this cruel world, everyone is happier with their language. Although it is said that Farsi is sugar, Kurdish is much sweeter if you ask me. Now, Khaneh Qubadi, this is the introductory section of his epic, which he completed in 1740. And Khaneh Qubadi was here really following the tradition of classical poets who often explained or felt the urge, the need to explain why they have chosen to write in Kurdish, because Kurdish was not a medium of literary expression as Persian was, or as Arabic and Turkish was. So it was deemed less worthy. So they often felt, the classical poets, to explain why they are doing such an odd task. And some of you are probably familiar or have heard of very famous explanation of Ahmad Khani, and some other for instance, very famous explanation by Sorani poets such as Nali. For me, Khaneh Qubadi really stands out because for me personally, the way I see it is that reasoning falls short. So whereas Ahmad Khani or some other poets have tried to reason that, yes, you know, we will do this so that we cultivate Kurdish, or so that the others won't say that we are not an educated nation. The reason for Khaneh Qubadi is is inexplicable. It's for some reason you're just happier with your language, and that's your basic human right. This poem was written in Horami or Gorani. Gorani is used by linguists as more generic term. And this was the language that was cultivated under the patronage of the Ardalan Principality in the Persian Empire. It was cultivated, it is believed to be, or arguably, the oldest literary tradition, because its cultivation or its development as a literary language goes back to the 15th or 16th century. And so it's the oldest, and it continued. It was really a lingua franca, one could say, of Kurds in the Persian Empire, and it was also used as the language of the court in, for instance, in Kurdish principalities in the Ottoman Empire, such as Baban. And this continued to the mid-19th century until the Persian king adopted the centralization policy, which led to the demise of the Ardalan, the House of Ardalan, the dynasty of Ardalan. And as a result, we witnessed very swift and very dramatic decline of the Gorani language. And so this is the trajectory or the development of the Kurdish literary dialects up to the late 19th century, Gorani and then Kurmanji, and later in the late 18th century, early 19th century, Sorani. So Sorani was the last to emerge, but was fortunate in the sense that its development was not interrupted the way that Gorani was completely. And it wasn't, or Kurmanji was, as you know, in the ban, as a result of the ban in Turkey and in Syria. So it was fortunate that it had an uninterrupted development. As a result, it got ascendancy over Kurmanji, for instance, in Iraqi Kurdistan, and in Iran in the 20th century, really replaced, from the late 19th century, you could see that it replaced Gorani as a medium of poetic expression. And I must emphasize that if you look at the literary production of scholars, literati, Kurdish literati, actually until the early 20th century, Gorani was, even Sorani speakers adopted Gorani as the language of poetic expression. But Sorani gradually replaced that. In Iran, let's go to this map. This is a map by Haig and Oppingen. So if you look at Iran, you see that in Iran, the majority is the speakers are Sorani speakers, and Kurmanji is also spoken in Iran. We have a so Gorani has declined to a state of being considered an endangered language now. So here is, despite its historic significance and development, really, and it's a massive cultural heritage. You see that its use is now limited to this little gray area on the Iran-Iraq border. The only dialect that is not spoken in Iran is Zazaki. Southern Kurdish, as Dr. Hiwa mentioned, is also is also spoken in Iran. But what happened to Gorani? So as I said, it's used really. It is used sporadically, and it is. I think it falls into the area of language activism, because the people who are involved in the revitalization of Gorani are language activists, some of them, and some are, of course, literary activists, but nonetheless activism, because and these are the examples of, but it is encouraged in the Hawraman area, and overall I think it's encouraged in Iran by Iranian Kurds. So here are some example of recent publications, which, as you see, very interestingly, considerable number of, at least here, 2 of them are written by women. So women play a significant role in this language revitalization. And it's not limited, the use is not limited to poetry, which is traditionally strong, but we see its use in novel and also other literary forms, in plays, because I will mention that Mariwan is the center for a very famous and very important festival, theater festival in Iranian Kurdistan. So it is used in different literary forms, but it's limited. On the history, so by the early 20th century, we lost Gorani, or throughout the 20th century, we lost Gorani. Sorani is the dialect that is mostly spoken. Iran is, you know, a multilingual, multi-ethnic country. Kurdish is the 3rd language with 6 to 7 million speakers. But it had a challenging history throughout the 20th century. During the first Pahlavi era, it was completely banned. The language was banned because it followed, it adopted the one nation, one state, one language policy. His son initially followed his father's policy, but following the establishment of the Kurdistan Republic of Mahabad, and the adoption or the declaration of Sorani as Kurdish Sorani as the official language. Following that, we witnessed, as stated by Professor Sheikh al-Islami, controlled and limited relaxation. So we saw relaxation of the assimilation policies, but in a controlled and a very limited way. So we saw some limited Kurdish publication. And after the revolution, Professor Sheikh al-Islami has put it really very correctly and beautifully: limited, restricted, and controlled tolerance. It has been tolerated, and but it is controlled. It has been controlled and restricted. And here, the Article 15 of Section 2 of the Iran Constitution is significant to note, because this is probably one of the most, well, it is the most noticeable change in the policy, or at least on the surface of the change of the regime. So this is the Article 15, and if you read it, it reads as: the official language and script of Iran, the lingua franca of its people, is Persian. Official documents, correspondence, and texts, as well as textbooks, must be in this language and script. However, the use of regional and tribal languages in the press and mass media, as well as for teaching of their literature in school, is allowed in addition to Persian. I'm sorry I had to read that, because it is important, and it is really an anchor to which activists, language activists, and Kurdish intellectuals who have been in Iran and outside as well, have tried to enforce with all its implied challenges and obstacles and all the problems, have tried to convince the government to enforce its own constitution. But they have faced many difficulties. However, I think especially in the last decade, we have seen I mean, optimistically, if you look at it, we see an explosion of activities. And what has happened, I think, okay, they are in different arenas. Still, the language are not taught, Kurdish is not taught at school, but if you look at the publication, again, before the revolution, before 1979 and after 1979, the actual number of the Kurdish publications are significantly higher. And now, I mean, that is another question. What are the content, you know, what are the top subjects of this publication? But nonetheless, it's significantly higher. And again, really, the fate of Kurdish languages, as other places that Kurds live, is quite tied to the political situation of the country. So when we had reformist government in place, for instance, during the Khatami time, I mean, the publication, the number rose significantly. I mean, the situation was changed really noticeably. That was a time that I was a student, so I remember vividly that like the revival, or you could say, of or the establishment of unions, student unions, and language courses in university, the establishment of language schools. But when the next government arrived, some of these activities were stopped, or were restricted. Some of the publications ceased to exist, actually. So it's it hasn't had a continuous life. It has faced its life has had many ups and downs. But I think one of the significant achievements for Kurdish scholars, activists, have been finally they managed to convince the government to allow the establishment of language course program, Kurdish language and literature program at University of Kurdistan. And for years, this was supposed to happen, but it was delayed. And finally, in 2015, they started officially. And here is just a screenshot. I wasn't sure if I can open the link to the website. Here is a link to University of Kurdistan and the Guruh Zaban Adabiyat Kurdi, the program. And I think what's really interesting, if you look at, if you go to, and for those of you who are familiar or can read Persian, the explanation of how it came about, how it came to existence, it's in itself really interesting. In the explanation, is they refer to the Article 15 of the Constitution. So it is constitutional that we are running this program.
Farangis Khan,
yes?
Sorry, if you could try to wrap it up in 2 minutes, please.
Sure.
Thank
so
you.
Currently they have 3 faculty members, and they have 160 students. Here you see the image of Dr. Bakhtiar Sajjadi, who is the program leader, and some of us in Exeter had the honor of seeing and meeting him here when he was doing his PhD in Exeter. But I just wrap up. So as well as this, I think this is probably the most significant because it reminds it's academic inclusion, or the inclusion of it in an academic level. It just reinforces the confidence of the speakers in the value of the language. It is symbolic, but it reinforces the value of the language. And again, in the last decade, especially, what is noticeable is the translation efforts. In both ways, the politics of it, it's really interesting. What books, what works are translated into Persian and vice versa, but nonetheless, this dialogue is happening. We have seen also the revitalization of Southern Kurdish in forms of new publications in these dialects. A group of dialects is teaching, and also the research that is conducted on this group of dialect. Despite all the challenges, the journals, the publications, especially the magazines, literary magazines, and some of them bilingual, continue to be published, and literary circles and academic circles are happening in forms of activities, some of them, most of them actually by volunteers on voluntary basis in most of the Kurdish cities. And language revitalization, teaching language or discussion on literature is among the prime agenda. Nonetheless, I mean, the challenge remains that the language activists are sometimes regarded as with suspicion, let's say, and the activities sometimes face restrictions. But I think the overall image is that it continue to live and strive. Thank you. I look forward to your comments and questions and our discussion.